Ada Island lies alone in the South Pacific Ocean, rising steeply from deep water roughly 160 kilometers southwest of Tongatapu, the main island of the Kingdom of Tonga. From the sea, it appears abrupt and unwelcoming. Sheer cliffs surround much of its perimeter, interrupted only by narrow rock shelves exposed during calm conditions. Dense vegetation covers the interior slopes, concealing what lies inland. There are no beaches suitable for easy landing, no visible signs of human habitation, and no natural harbor where a vessel can anchor safely. Weather systems pass through the region without obstruction, bringing sudden rain, heavy winds, and unpredictable seas. Once beyond sight of neighboring islands, the surrounding ocean offers no reference points and little chance of being seen. By the mid-20th century, Ada Island had been uninhabited for over 100 years. Historical records and oral tradition confirm that a Polynesian community once lived there, cultivating crops and maintaining a small settlement. That community was forcibly removed in the 19th century after violent slave raids devastated the island. Survivors fled, and the island was abandoned. Over time, vegetation reclaimed former gardens, structures collapsed, and trails disappeared. Ada became a place known but avoided. Fishermen rarely approached it, preferring safer waters closer to inhabited islands. The island remained silent, unchanged, and largely forgotten. In June 1965, 6 boys arrived there unintentionally. Their presence was not the result of exploration, migration, or planning. It was the outcome of an impulsive decision made by adolescents whose understanding of risk did not extend beyond the horizon. The boys were students at St. Andrew's College, a Catholic boarding school in Nuku'alofa, Tonga's capital. Their names were Sione Fatawa, Kolo Fekitoa, Tevita Latu, Mano Tota, Luke Vicoso, and Stephen Tevita. They were between 13 and 16 years old. All came from working-class families. Their childhoods involved shared labor, respect for authority, and participation in communal life. They were familiar with farming, basic fishing, and manual work. None had experience navigating open ocean routes, and none possessed formal survival training. Life at the boarding school was disciplined and restrictive. Movement was controlled. Contact with family was limited. For adolescents accustomed to communal village life, the environment felt confining. In this setting, the idea of leaving briefly, of reclaiming autonomy, took hold. Accounts differ slightly on the intended destination. Some later said they hoped to reach Fiji. Others described the plan as temporary escape rather than a specific journey. What is consistent is the lack of preparation. The decision was made quickly, without consultation, and without adult supervision. One night, they left the school grounds unnoticed and took a small wooden fishing boat belonging to a local fisherman. The boat was approximately 7 meters long, designed for nearshore use. It had no engine. They brought a limited supply of bananas and coconuts and a small amount of water. They carried no compass, no navigation charts, and no means of communication. They expected the journey to be short. At first, the sea was calm. By morning, Tonga was already out of sight. Shortly after departure, weather conditions deteriorated. Trade winds strengthened, and waves grew larger. Without proper sails or steering equipment, maintaining direction became increasingly difficult. The boys attempted to paddle and adjust their course, but without reference points, their efforts were ineffective. Over the following days, the boat drifted southward. Food supplies were exhausted early. Fresh water ran out soon after. Rainwater was collected when possible, but it was insufficient to meet daily needs. The sun exposure was constant. Dehydration became a serious concern. Sleep came in brief intervals, interrupted by the need to keep the boat stable. At some point, the rudder was damaged or lost, further reducing control. The boat could no longer be steered effectively. For 8 days, they remained at sea. During that time, no ships were sighted. No land was visible. The Pacific offered no indication of proximity to safety. Then, without warning, land appeared. Dark cliffs rose from the water. Atta Island came into view. Reaching the island was dangerous. Waves broke against the cliffs, leaving little margin for error. The boys waited for a moment of reduced swell and guided the boat toward a narrow rock opening. The vessel struck rocks during landing and sustained damage. They reached land alive, but the boat was no longer seaworthy. Repairing it for long-distance travel was impossible. Once ashore, they assessed their surroundings. There were no buildings. No visible paths. No indication of recent human presence. The realization was immediate. Leaving the island was no longer an option. Isolation was complete. The first priority was water. Without it, survival would be measured in days. The boys explored inland, moving cautiously through dense vegetation. Eventually, they discovered a small freshwater spring near the island center. The flow was limited, but it was consistent. This single discovery transformed their prospects. Long-term survival became possible. With water secured, they turned to fire. Fire was essential for warmth, cooking, and signaling. Using friction-based methods remembered from school lessons and cultural knowledge, they attempted to start a fire. Initial attempts failed. Persistence led to success. Once established, the fire was maintained continuously for the duration of their time on the island. It was never allowed to go out. Food acquisition followed. Fishing became a primary source of protein. Hooks were improvised from wire salvaged from the damaged boat. Lines were made from fibers and vines. Fishing success varied with weather and season, but it provided sustenance. Seabirds were captured during nesting periods. Eggs were collected carefully to avoid depleting future supply. Inland exploration revealed wild taro and banana plants, remnants of earlier settlements. The boys learned which plants were safe through cautious testing. Small quantities were consumed first, followed by observation. Over time, a reliable plant-based diet developed. They supplemented this with coconut flesh and occasional shellfish collected along the rocks. Shelter was constructed using palm leaves and wood. Structures were reinforced against storms. Sleeping areas were elevated to reduce insect exposure and moisture. Multiple shelters were built to provide redundancy if one failed. Tools were refined gradually. Sharp stones were used for cutting. Wooden implements were shaped for digging and carrying. Routine became central to survival. Mornings were reserved for food gathering and water collection. Afternoons involved maintenance, tool improvement, and exploration. Evenings were spent resting. Time was marked by sunrise and sunset, by changes in weather and vegetation, rather than by calendar dates. Discipline was enforced collectively. Arguments occurred, particularly in the early months, but the group agreed on rules. Conflicts were resolved through separation rather than violence. Individuals involved in disputes would take time apart until tensions eased. No physical fights were reported. Cooperation remained intact. One of the boys suffered a serious injury after falling from a height. His leg was broken. The others treated the injury using splints made from wood and vines. He was cared for over several months. The injury healed sufficiently for him to walk again, though recovery was slow. Hygiene was maintained deliberately. The boys bathed regularly in the ocean. Living areas were kept clean. Food waste was managed carefully. This reduced illness. No severe infections were recorded. Despite limited resources, health remained stable. Psychological endurance was sustained through structure rather than reflection. There is no evidence of panic or despair. Fear was present, particularly in the early days, but it did not dominate behavior. Each day required work. Each task reinforced cooperation. Over time, survival became systematic rather than reactive. Months passed without any sign of rescue. Seasons changed. Storms damaged shelters and required rebuilding. Food availability fluctuated. Fatigue accumulated. Injuries healed slowly. Emotional strain surfaced in moments of silence rather than conflict. The absence of external reference points made time feel indistinct. Days blended together. At least once, the boys attempted to signal passing ships using fire and smoke, but none approached close enough to notice. Ada Island lay outside major shipping routes. The surrounding ocean remained largely empty. Despite this, order was maintained. Responsibilities were shared. No one was excluded. Survival was collective rather than individual. The group functioned as a unit, adapting continuously to changing conditions. In September 1966, more than 15 months after their arrival, an Australian fishing vessel captained by Peter Warner passed near Ada Island. Smoke rising from the cliffs caught the crew's attention. Warner investigated, expecting to find remains. Instead, 6 healthy teenagers emerged from the vegetation. The rescue was calm. There was no dramatic reaction. The boys identified themselves and explained their situation. Warner transported them back to Tonga. Authorities confirmed their identities. Families were notified. The charge of boat theft was dismissed after Warner compensated the owner. The boys returned to ordinary lives. Some became tradesmen. Others worked at sea. Their story remained largely unknown outside Tonga for decades. There were no books, no films, and little international attention. Historically, the incident stands as a documented case of cooperative survival. No deaths occurred. No violence defined their experience. Structure, routine, and shared responsibility sustained them. Ada Island remains uninhabited. The shelters are gone. The fire has long since burned out. What remains is the record of what occurred when isolation met order. The story does not end with triumph. It ends with continuity. 6 children endured not through dominance or luck, but through balance.